He said he'd come. He promised. But I sat in that cold hospital room for 6 hours, alone. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead while the 4-drip ticked like a slow, mocking clock. A nurse came in, adjusted the machine, gave me a sad little smile. "Your son still hasn't called back." The doctor came next, bad news, something about my kidneys. Still, no sign of James. When I finally called him, his voice was casual. "Sorry, Jess needed me. She had a rough day." Jess, his girlfriend, came before his dying father. That was when something inside me snapped. Before we continue, I'd love to know, where are you watching from today? Comment below. I wasn't always sitting in hospital beds waiting to be remembered. There was a time when I was everything to that boy. His world, his safety net, his hero. James was born 2 months early. I still remember the panic in Marjorie's eyes, the way her hand crushed mine as the nurses wheeled her away. They said there might be complications, but he came out loud and stubborn, just like his mother. From the moment I held him in my arms, I knew I'd never love anything more. Marjorie and I didn't have much. A small house with peeling paint and squeaky floors, but it was ours. I worked maintenance at the high school and picked up handyman gigs on weekends. Marjorie taught piano out of the front room. Money was tight, but our home was full of warmth. James would toddle around with his toy hammer, copying me as I fixed cabinets or patched walls. We were a family. A real one. Every Sunday morning, I made pancakes shaped like dinosaurs. James would wake up early just to sit on the counter, legs swinging, helping me stir the batter. Marjorie would play something soft on the piano, and we'd eat as a family while the sun streamed through the curtains. When James was 9, Marjorie got sick. Breast cancer. Aggressive. The kind that doesn't ask permission, just takes. I still remember her final weeks like they happened yesterday. The way her voice trembled when she asked me to be both father and mother. "Don't let him feel alone, John," she whispered. "Make sure he grows up kind." I nodded, promising things I wasn't sure I could keep. After she passed, I poured everything into James. Every ounce of grief became devotion. I never remarried. Never even went on a date. My world narrowed to one purpose, raising that boy right. He never wanted for anything, even if that meant I did. I patched my old boots 3 times before buying new ones, just so he could have name-brand cleats. I worked nights so I could afford a used truck when he got his license. I taught him how to shave, how to shake a man's hand, how to admit when you're wrong. We built a treehouse together in the summer of his 13th year. Took us 2 weeks, and it leaned to the left, but he was proud of it. He was a good kid. Soft-hearted. Cried when the neighbor's dog died. Brought me coffee when I stayed up late fixing the heater. Called me Pop even in high school, when his friends had moved on to just Dad. But something shifted after college. He got a job in the city, finance, I think. Something with spreadsheets and conference calls. He still called me every Sunday at first. Quick check-ins, stories about deadlines and office jokes I didn't understand. Then he met Jess. She was polite at first. Pretty, sharp, too sharp, maybe. I saw the way she scanned my house when she visited. How she wrinkled her nose at the old floral couch Marjorie loved. "It's very nostalgic," she'd said with a tight smile. Still, I tried. I wanted to like her. For James' sake. They moved in together within a year. He stopped coming around as much, though he always had an excuse. Work, traffic, errands. Sunday calls became Sunday texts. Then nothing at all. I didn't complain. I figured that's just how things go. Kids grow up. They drift. I told myself it was normal. But it wasn't. Not really. The man who used to hug me tight every night before bed now barely looked up from his phone when I spoke. The boy who once cried into my shirt after scraping his knee now brushed me off with a distracted, "Yeah, I'm listening," while scrolling through messages. And yet, I held on. Because those early years, the good years, they weren't a dream. They were real. I know they were. I remember Marjorie's hand on my arm the first time James said, "Dada." The way her eyes lit up like he'd just spoken poetry. I remember watching him walk across the stage at graduation, standing there in the crowd, clapping until my palms hurt. I remember driving 4 hours in the snow just to bring him his winter coat after he left it at home during his first year at college. That kind of love doesn't vanish. It doesn't just fade. Or at least, I thought it didn't. But love, it seems, can be quieted, smothered under years of neglect and replaced with convenience. With priorities that don't include you. Still, I clung to the good years. I played those memories like a broken record, hoping they'd drown out the present. Hoping I'd wake up one day and he'd be that little boy again, standing in the kitchen with pancake batter on his nose, asking if he could lick the spoon. Instead, I sat in a hospital room with an 4 in my arm and no one in the chair beside me. And that's when I began to wonder, if love isn't shown, does it still exist? The first time I truly noticed the shift was during Thanksgiving. James had promised they'd be there by noon. I'd woken up early, just like every year, to start Marjorie's stuffing recipe, the one with the sweet Italian sausage and sage she used to dry herself on the back porch. The house smelled like memories, like family, like warmth. I even set the table with the old linen napkins and our wedding china. No one showed up until nearly 4. James walked in holding a bottle of store-bought wine, and Jess followed, clicking in with those tall heels like she was walking a red carpet. She looked around and smiled like she was indulging something beneath her. "You really went all out," she said, placing the wine on the table without so much as a hug. James gave me a half-hearted side hug. "Sorry, pop brunch with her friends ran long. You know how it is." No, I didn't. I said nothing. I smiled, even. We sat, ate lukewarm turkey, and they left before sunset, said they had another dinner to get to. After that, things just kept changing. Little things at first. James stopped calling me Pop, it became Dad, distant, formal, like I was a client instead of a father. He started suggesting things. "You should really think about downsizing," he said once, eyeing the hallway where the wallpaper had started peeling. "This place is too much for one person." "I built this place," I reminded him. He just shrugged. "Still, it's a lot of square footage to keep clean." Jess was more direct. "It's charming, but honestly, there's real value in this lot. The market's hot right now. You could make a killing." A killing. As if the house was a stock to cash out on, not the place where Marjorie's laughter still echoed in the hallways. They began visiting less and less. And when they did come, it always felt like they were just checking a box. Jess would stay glued to her phone, tapping away at her screen like being there was a punishment. James would sit on the couch, legs bouncing, eyes on the door. He never stayed long. Always an excuse, a meeting, a client dinner, a sudden errand. I used to walk him to his car. One day I realized he stopped waiting for that. He'd just leave. No hug. No goodbye. Just the sound of tires crunching the gravel drive. I started making excuses for them. "They're busy," I'd tell myself. "They're young. Careers. Commitments. Life." But the excuses started to taste sour. Especially when the phone calls stopped altogether. I'd go weeks without hearing from him. When I'd call, it always went to voicemail. "Hey, you've reached James, leave a message." I did. Over and over. He never called back. One afternoon, I saw they had posted vacation photos online, a beach, cocktails, Jess in oversized sunglasses. That same weekend, I'd left him a message asking if he could drive me to a follow-up appointment with the cardiologist. No reply. I started noticing how the conversations we did have changed. He asked about the property taxes, the condition of the roof, the plumbing. Never about my health, my days, my memories. Once, I told him I'd been feeling dizzy, maybe side effects from my medication. He barely looked up from his phone. Yeah, you should probably look into that. Drink more water or something. I remember sitting there, staring at him, thinking, who are you? The shift wasn't sudden, it was slow, like a slow leak in a tire. Just enough air lost each day until one morning, you wake up stranded. What hurt most wasn't the coldness. It was the absence. The silence. The indifference. I didn't need him to buy me things. I didn't need grand gestures. I needed him to care. To call. To ask me if I was okay. To notice when something was wrong. But he didn't. And Jess, she only ever saw me as an obstacle. She spoke to me in the same tone you'd use with a stubborn clerk at a store. Everything she said had that polite sharpness, like a knife wrapped in a napkin. One day, she accidentally mentioned how long properties sat in probate court. It can take months if the will isn't sorted, she said over coffee. That's why we're thinking ahead. It was the first time I heard her refer to my home, my life's work, as something she had a stake in. That night, I sat on the porch with a cup of coffee and stared out at the field where James used to play soccer. I remembered how he used to wave at me from the goal post, shouting, "Did you see that, Pop?" I always did. I saw everything. I remembered everything. But now, he didn't see me at all. It was supposed to be just another Sunday dinner. James called that morning, surprisingly, said they were coming by. Thought we'd have a little family time, he said, his voice a bit too cheerful. I should have known then. Jess never came around without a motive. Still, I roasted a chicken. Mashed some potatoes. Even put on Marjorie's old apron for a moment before folding it neatly back in the drawer. I wanted it to feel like old times, even if it hadn't for years. They showed up 2 hours late. Jess didn't say hello. She brushed past me like I was part of the furniture and headed straight into the living room. James gave me that stiff half-hug and followed. They sat on the couch, arms crossed, barely looking at the food I'd spent the day preparing. "We've been talking," Jess started, cutting right through the small talk I'd tried to offer. "About the house." My stomach dropped. James nodded. "It's too much for you, Dad. It's not safe. That fall you had last month? What if it happens again?" I hadn't fallen. I'd tripped on a corner of the rug and caught myself just fine. I'd told him that. But here he was, using it like ammunition. Jess leaned forward, her voice calm, rehearsed. "We've been looking into assisted living communities. There's one just outside the city, very nice. Private rooms. Full medical support. You've been looking?" I asked, my voice slow, trying to steady the shaking in my hands. James cleared his throat. "Just exploring options. You're getting older, Pop. It's time to think practically." "And what happens to the house?" Jess answered before he could. "Well, it wouldn't make sense to leave it empty. We could renovate it, maybe rent it out or even sell it," I finished for her. They didn't respond. They didn't need to. The betrayal wasn't just in what they said. It was in the way they said it. Like I wasn't in the room. Like I was already gone. I looked around at the walls I'd painted myself, the window I'd replaced with James one summer when he was 12, the corner where Marjorie's piano once stood. This house was more than wood and nails, it was our life. Our history. "You think you're helping," I said quietly. But you're not. Jess gave a tight smile. We just want what's best for everyone. No. They wanted what was best for them. They ate a few bites of dinner, said they had another appointment, and left before the sun went down. No, thank you. No, good night. Just the front door closing behind them with a click that felt like a lock turning. I sat in silence for a long time. The chicken was cold. The potatoes untouched. That night, I called an old friend of mine, Walter, a retired notary. We hadn't spoken in years, but his voice warmed when he heard mine. Everything all right? He asked. I didn't answer right away. Just thinking about making some changes, I said finally. To the will. A pause. Then, tell me when you want to meet. The next day, I found a real estate flyer folded on the kitchen counter. It hadn't been there the day before. Glossy photos of houses, big red lettering, we buy fast, cash offers available. I don't know if Jess left it there on purpose or if it slipped out of her purse. Either way, it was the final confirmation. They were circling. Waiting. Planning. Later that week, I ran into my neighbor Irene at the mailbox. She gave me a strange look, then said, I heard you might be moving. I stared at her. Who told you that? Your son. He and his girlfriend stopped by last week while you were out. Said you were downsizing. Offered to buy my lot too, said something about developing the land. I must have stood there, frozen, for a full minute. He was already acting like I was gone. Like the house was his. Like I was just a delay in a transaction. I thanked her, walked back inside, and locked the door behind me. That evening, I sat in the armchair with Marjorie's picture in my lap. I talked to her like I used to, soft, tired words. You see what he's doing? I whispered. You told me to protect him. But now I think I have to protect us, from him. She didn't answer, of course. But somehow, I felt her silence understood me better than James ever could now. And the worst part, the part that hollowed me out, was that he didn't even fight me. He didn't argue or storm off or cry. He just nodded, as if I were some outdated system being quietly retired. The boy who once clung to my leg at preschool, terrified to let go, now wanted to hand me over to strangers with a brochure and a forced smile. That was the night I stopped making excuses for him. That was the night I finally admitted the truth. My son wasn't coming back, not the boy I raised, not the man I hoped he'd become. Something had changed. And if I didn't act soon, everything Marjorie and I built, everything we were, would be taken from me, piece by piece. And worse, it would be taken without apology. A week passed after the dinner before I heard from James again. Not a call. Not even a text. Just the creak of the front door opening early one afternoon while I was napping in the den. I startled awake to the sound of footsteps on the hardwood. Hello? I called out. It's just us, James replied. His voice was low, cautious. I stood and walked into the living room to find both of them, James and Jess, standing there like they owned the place. Jess held a folder, James had a tablet in hand. We knocked, Jess added quickly, not making eye contact. You used your key, I said. James shrugged. You gave it to me. I gave it to you in case of emergencies, I said, more tired than angry. Jess gave James a glance, then opened the folder. We just wanted to go over some paperwork, she said. Things that would make transitions easier. I sat down slowly in the armchair, my knees cracking like brittle twigs. What transitions? She smiled, that practiced, fake politeness. It's just smart to be prepared. You know, for your medical decisions, power of attorney, property transfer, in case something happens. In case, I repeated, watching them carefully. James held out the tablet. There's a form here that just makes it easier if we need to act fast. You can sign it digitally. Act fast for what? I asked. They didn't answer. I didn't touch the tablet. They left after 15 minutes, claiming they had an appointment with a financial advisor. Jess took a long look at the backyard before walking out. I noticed her tapping something into her phone. That evening, I poured myself a scotch and sat with that feeling again, the one I couldn't shake anymore. The one that said, they're planning something. It was more than detachment now. It was strategy. It was entitlement. I walked through the house with fresh eyes. My eyes stopped at each item: the photo of James in his scout uniform, the old cuckoo clock Marjorie's parents gave us for our 10th anniversary, the crooked towel rack James helped install when he was 10. Memories. But to them, it was just inventory. The next day, while I was organizing bills in the kitchen, I heard the back porch creak. I turned the corner and froze. Jess was standing in the hallway, looking at the linen closet. She jumped when she saw me. "Oh. I didn't think you'd be home." "This is my home," I said, keeping my voice calm. She laughed nervously. "Right, of course. I was just looking for something. You mentioned extra blankets." "I hadn't." She left quickly after that, muttering something about dinner reservations. That evening, I called Walter again. "I need to make some updates," I said. He didn't ask questions. "Come by Thursday," he said. "Bring whatever you want to protect." I pulled out the manila folder I'd been building in secret. Copies of documents, bank records, property titles, and an older version of my will. I hadn't read that thing in years. I flipped through it slowly, wincing as I saw James' name listed over and over again. Primary beneficiary. Executor. Power of attorney. All of it. All of it trusted to a man who now treated me like a stumbling inconvenience on his way to owning a house he didn't build. I set the folder aside and walked into the garage. I stood there in silence, surrounded by the workbench, the tools, the faded paint stains on the floor. I could still hear Marjorie's laughter drifting in from the kitchen years ago while James and I worked on his school project, a birdhouse we never managed to paint straight. Then I remembered something I hadn't thought about in years. After Marjorie died, James had nightmares for months. He'd come into my room at night, crying, clutching his blanket. I'd let him crawl into my bed, his little hands wrapped around mine like they were the only thing keeping him safe. I protected him from every monster in the closet, every shadow in the corner. Now, he was the one waiting in the dark for me to go. A few days later, I overheard something I wasn't meant to. They thought I was asleep in the den. Jess and James were standing outside near the garden, just close enough for their voices to carry. "We need him to sign it soon," Jess said, her voice flat. "Once the power of attorney's in place, we can get a valuation on the house." "He's being stubborn," James muttered. "I might have to bring it up again when he's tired." I felt sick. She replied, "He's not going to last forever, James. This is the window." That word, window, clanged in my chest like a bell made of lead. They were waiting for the end. Not hoping for it, maybe, but planning around it. Planning for after me. I wanted to storm out there and scream. I wanted to shake him by the shoulders and ask him who he'd become. But I didn't. Instead, I went back inside and wrote down everything I heard. Word for word. And then I opened the desk drawer and pulled out the envelope where I kept Marjorie's letter, the one she wrote to James when she was dying. She had written it in shaky handwriting, telling him to always be kind, to take care of his father, to never let greed take root. She asked him to be better than the world around him. I stared at it for a long time. Then I folded it back into the envelope. Because if he ever saw it now, I don't think he'd even understand what she meant. That night, I didn't sleep. I stayed up, not out of fear, but out of clarity. They weren't just waiting for me to leave. They were setting the table for my exit. But I had one move left. And I wasn't going to play it with anger. I was going to play it with precision. Speech balloon. Have you ever felt betrayed by your own family? Let us know in the comments. The morning I decided to confront James, the sky was the color of wet ash, one of those cold, gray mornings that feels like it's been waiting to happen for years. I wasn't angry. I was emptied out. There was no heat left in my chest. Just the slow, steady certainty that this couldn't go on. I called him. Can you come by this afternoon? Alone, I added before he could ask. Just you. There was a long pause. Yeah, he said finally. Sure. When he arrived, I was already sitting at the kitchen table with 2 mugs of black coffee waiting. He walked in with his hands in his jacket pockets, eyes tired. He didn't sit at first. Just hovered. You okay, Pop? He asked. I motioned to the chair across from me. Sit down. He did, slowly, like he knew something was coming. I want to ask you something, I said. And I want an honest answer. He nodded, cautiously. Why have you and Jess been pushing so hard to get this house? He opened his mouth to protest, but I raised a hand. Don't lie to me, James. Not now. He shifted in his seat. We thought it'd be better for you. A facility could help with your meds, and the upkeep here is. Cut the script, I said. I heard you two in the garden last week. I know you've been planning around my death. Don't insult me by pretending it's anything else. He went quiet. A flush crept up his neck. I don't want you to die, Dad, he said finally, but it sounded like a line rehearsed too many times. We're just trying to prepare. Jess has done a lot of research. Jess, I repeated. She seems to be the one driving this, doesn't she? She's thinking about our future, he snapped, then immediately pulled back. I mean, it affects both of us. You mean my home affects both of you? He looked down at his hands. We're just trying to build something. This place. I built this place. Silence. I patched the roof myself after the storm in '87. I scraped together every penny to keep this home standing when your mother got sick. She died here, in our bedroom, because she didn't want to go anywhere else. And now you talk about it like it's a piece of land to be flipped. He looked like he wanted to say something, maybe to argue, maybe to apologize, but nothing came out. I leaned forward. I've never asked you for much. Not when you forgot Father's Day. Not when you stopped calling. Not even when you left me alone in that hospital bed for 6 hours. He looked up sharply. I saw guilt then, real, bitter guilt, flicker across his face. I was scared, he said quietly. I didn't know how bad it was. Jess said. She always says, doesn't she? I interrupted. And you always listen. I let the silence hang there. Do you even remember what your mother asked me before she died? He looked at me, eyes glassy. She made me promise to protect you. To make sure you never felt alone in this world. And I did. I gave you everything I had. And now I sit here watching you plan my removal like a contractor figuring out when to gut a kitchen. His voice cracked. It's not like that. It is, I said. And I'm done pretending it's not. He said nothing. I looked at him, really looked. The lines around his eyes, the graying hair at his temples. He wasn't my little boy anymore. And maybe that was the problem. He'd grown into someone I didn't recognize. Someone I wouldn't choose to trust. I'm not signing over anything, I said. Not now. Not ever. His shoulders tensed. You're not being reasonable. No, James, I said, my voice firmer than it had been in years. You're not being respectful. He stared at me for a long time. Then he stood. Jess isn't going to like this. That told me everything I needed to know. He walked out without another word. An hour later, Irene, my neighbor, dropped off a casserole and lingered at the door. He didn't look happy, she said with a small smile. I shrugged. Truth doesn't always feel good. She hesitated. John, I hope you don't mind me saying this, but we've all noticed. The way he treats you. The way she talks about the property like it's already hers. My chest tightened. We just didn't know if you saw it too. I do now, I said. She touched my arm gently. If you ever need anything, a ride, company, someone to run interference, you've got folks here who care. That night, I sat with the folder again. I added new notes. Dates. Phrases I remembered from the garden. And then I opened a clean sheet of paper. I wrote a new letter, not to James, but to the lawyer. It was time. No more waiting. No more hoping he'd wake up and remember who he used to be. The next morning, I booked the appointment. Walter was waiting at his office, a fresh cup of coffee in his hand, just like always. You sure about this? He asked. I nodded. More than I've ever been about anything. He opened his drawer and pulled out the file. It was time to take my name back. And take his off. Walter's office hadn't changed much in the 30 years I'd known him. Same oak desk with the scratch down the side, same clunky file cabinets labeled in fading black ink, same dusty ceramic mug that read World's Okayest Lawyer. We'd gone to school together, Walter and I, drifted over the years but always stayed in orbit, weddings, funerals, town meetings. He was the kind of man who kept things close to the chest and didn't speak unless there was weight behind his words. I won't ask why, he said after I handed him the folder. Don't need to, I replied. You already know. He sat down heavily, flipping through the papers I'd brought. Property deeds in order. Accounts, too. Do you want to revoke the previous will entirely? I nodded. Burn it, for all I care. Walter gave a tight smile but said nothing. His fingers moved with quiet efficiency, typing up the new language. The room was filled with the rhythmic tap of keys and the occasional sigh. He paused. Executor? Emma. That made him look up. Your granddaughter? She's the only one who still visits without asking for something. He nodded, typing it in. Beneficiaries? Remove James completely. No split, no share. Walter raised an eyebrow. That'll raise flags. I want a no contest clause. He leaned back. If he fights it, everything goes to charity? All of it. Down to the last nail. He studied me for a moment. You've really made peace with this? I stared out the window for a long time before answering. I tried to hold on. I tried to make excuses. But love that isn't returned starts to rot. And I won't let that rot eat what Marjorie and I built. Walter nodded and returned to typing. While he worked, I looked around his office. Framed photos of his kids on the wall, a few degrees, a dusty baseball from our high school days. Time had moved on for all of us, but Walter still looked out for people. Quietly. Without asking anything in return. Put a line in there, I said suddenly. About the piano. He glanced up. The old upright in your front room? Marjorie's. If Emma wants it, she gets it. If not, it stays with the house. No resale. He smiled faintly and typed it in. By the time we were done, it was just past noon. The final document sat before me, thick and sharp-smelling, filled with language I barely recognized but understood deeply. It was the hardest thing I've ever signed. My hand trembled a little as I wrote my name at the bottom. With that one signature, I rewrote the future. A future without James in it. Walter slid the paper away gently and placed it in a thick envelope. I'll file the official version Monday. You'll get a notarized copy by mail. Thanks, I said, standing slowly. As I reached the door, Walter added, You're not wrong, you know. Just because someone's blood doesn't make them family. I nodded but didn't trust myself to speak. The drive home was silent. No radio. Just the hum of the engine and the steady rhythm of regret tapping against my ribs. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel relieved. I felt hollow. But I also felt free. That night, I sat on the porch with a cup of coffee and Marjorie's picture in my lap. I watched the sunset wash gold over the fields. Somewhere far away, kids were playing, their laughter drifting faintly on the wind. You wouldn't recognize him now, I said to the photo. But then I paused, because that wasn't entirely true. Maybe she would. Maybe she saw it coming before I did. Maybe that's why she made me promise to raise him kind, because she knew how easy it would be for him to go cold. Still, I kept my end of the promise for as long as I could. And now I had to protect something else. Not him. But her legacy. The next morning, I made one more stop, the town's Veterans Resource Center. A quiet little building tucked behind the library. I met with the director, a young woman named Alicia who wore a cardigan and had calloused hands. I'd like to talk about a donation, I said. She smiled politely, until I slid the envelope across the table. Her eyes widened as she read. You're sure? Completely. I want it in my wife's name. She believed in service. Believed in building something that lasted. She nodded slowly, understanding blooming in her expression. We could use the house, she said after a moment. As a halfway place. Somewhere safe for vets getting back on their feet. It would change lives. That's the point. We made a few arrangements, talked logistics, and I left feeling steady. When I returned home, I placed the envelope with the finalized will in the back of the old roll-top desk in the study. Locked it. And then I sat down at the kitchen table, stared at the front door, and waited. Because I knew James would be back. And when he came, expecting another round of gentle pleading and quiet surrender. He'd find something he never anticipated. A father who loved him enough to let go. The final straw didn't come with a bang. It came with a ding. An email notification lit up my phone as I sat by the window, sipping my evening tea. The subject line read. Price estimate, 331 Willow Avenue. I nearly dropped the mug. Willow Avenue. My house. I opened the email slowly, my heart thudding in my chest. It was from a real estate agent I'd never heard of. Attached were high-resolution images of my home, the front porch, the kitchen, the backyard garden where Marjorie used to plant her tulips. There was even a drone photo from above. I stared at the images, a sick weight settling in my stomach. Someone had been inside the house. Recently. Someone had taken these without my knowledge, without my permission. And there was a line in the body of the message that made my skin go cold. This estimate is based on full renovation potential after current tenant transition is complete. We recommend listing within 60 to 90 days for optimal return. Current tenant transition. That was me. I was the tenant they were already planning to transition. My fingers tightened around the phone. I read the email 3 times before the rage truly set in. I wasn't even being seen as a father anymore. Not even as a man. I was just a placeholder, something to be moved, managed, erased. And what hurt more than the betrayal, was the silence that followed. No call. No explanation. Just that email, cold and calculated. I forwarded it to myself, then printed it out and tucked it into the file with the rest, recordings, documents, witness statements. The pile was growing. I thought back to all the little things Jess had done over the past few weeks. Her sudden interest in my garage. The questions about how often I used the second bathroom. James asking for old utility bills, just in case. It had all been leading here. They weren't just planning behind my back. They were executing behind it. And that night, as I sat in the dark house, listening to the wind creak the old window panes, I realized something with startling clarity. They thought I wouldn't fight back. They thought age meant weakness. That silence meant surrender. They forgot who built this place. Who laid its foundation with blood and time. Who buried his wife beneath the dogwood tree in the yard and still spoke to her every morning with a coffee in hand. They forgot that this house wasn't just walls and a roof. It was ours. The next morning, I packed everything into a neat leather binder, all the documents, copies of the will, the audio clips I'd recorded on my old phone, including the one where Jess said, "He's not going to last long." Then I called Emma. She picked up on the second ring. "Grandpa?" "Sweetheart," I said. "Do you think you could drive me somewhere this weekend?" "Anywhere you need," she replied without hesitation. I told her the plan. Not all of it, just enough. She didn't ask questions. She just said she'd be there. That afternoon, I pressed my best shirt. The one Marjorie used to call my dignity shirt. I polished my shoes. Printed another copy of the new will. And I made one last adjustment to a letter I'd written by hand, the kind you don't send by email. The kind that lives in a drawer until someone needs to read it. It was time. Jess's birthday dinner was on Saturday, some trendy little bistro on Main Street. Private event, the invite had said, though I never received one. But I heard about it through the grapevine. Irene mentioned it. So did the mailman, actually. Small towns have a way of keeping you in the loop. I arrived 10 minutes after they'd been seated. Emma walked in beside me, steady as a compass. I didn't need to say anything. My presence did it all. Heads turned as I walked past the hostess, who blinked in confusion but didn't stop me. I spotted James and Jess near the back, surrounded by friends, laughter, wine glasses lifted. When James saw me, the color drained from his face. Jess looked like she'd bit into a lemon. I approached the table slowly. No anger. No rush. Just calm. "Sorry to interrupt," I said evenly. "I know I wasn't invited. But I brought a gift." I reached into my coat and pulled out the binder. James stood up. "Dad, this isn't the..." "This," I said, holding the binder up, "is a copy of the new will. It names you in exactly 0 places." Murmurs filled the room. Jess's face contorted. "You can't just..." "I can," I said, looking her dead in the eye. And I did. "In fact, if either of you tries to contest it, the entire estate will go to a veterans shelter." A hush fell over the table. I laid the binder gently in front of James. "I know you've been speaking to realtors," I continued. "I know you've been taking photos, preparing listings. I've got the email. I've got your voice on tape." He didn't deny it. He didn't even look at me. Instead, he stared down at the binder like it was a ticking bomb. "I came here not for revenge," I said. "But to give you one last chance. To understand who I am. And what you've done." Then I turned to leave. As I walked out, I heard forks clink against plates. I heard whispers start to spread. But I didn't hear James say a word. And somehow, that silence was everything. I didn't go straight home after the dinner. Emma drove us to the bluff outside town, the one Marjorie and I used to visit when James was little, before the world grew sharp around its edges. We sat in silence for a while, listening to the wind rustle through the dry grass and the distant hum of cars on the highway. "You okay?" she asked softly. I nodded, though the truth was more complicated. Feels like burying someone who's still alive, I finally said. Emma didn't push. She just sat with me, her presence steady and warm, no judgment, no fixing. Just family. When I got home, the house was quiet. The kind of quiet that doesn't just mean silence, but peace. The walls felt different now. Lighter, somehow. Like the house itself had been holding its breath and was finally allowed to exhale. But peace is rarely permanent. The next morning, I opened my email to find a message from James. Subject: we need to talk. No apology. No explanation. Just a meeting request. I didn't reply. The day after, he called. Twice. I let it ring. And on the third day, he showed up at my door. I almost didn't answer. But I did. He looked tired. Pale. Less like the man who barked financial advice and more like the boy who used to bring me wildflowers from the woods. "Can I come in?" he asked. I stepped aside. Not warmly. Just enough. He sat in the same kitchen chair where I'd first taught him how to tie a necktie before prom. Funny how life circles back like that. "I don't know what to say," he started. "Try the truth," I said. He rubbed his face with both hands. "I messed up. I waited. I got caught up. Jess, she's always thinking ahead, always planning. She convinced me it was time to move things forward. I let her talk for me. I let her think for me. And you?" I asked. "What do you think?" He swallowed hard. "I think I forgot who I was raised to be." That stopped me. For just a moment. He looked up, eyes rimmed red. "I was angry when Mom died. Not at you. Just, at the world. And I think I've been carrying that bitterness without even knowing it. I let it change me. I let it choose for me. I waited 6 hours in that hospital," I said quietly. "I know. She needed you more," you said. He closed his eyes, like the words physically hurt. "I'm sorry." There it was. Finally. But it didn't feel like enough. "Do you know what made me rewrite the will?" I asked. He shook his head. It wasn't the neglect. It wasn't even the scheming. It was realizing that the man I loved, the boy I raised, would have been ashamed of the man he became. Tears welled up in his eyes. "I'm not asking for your money," he said quickly. "Not anymore. I don't want to lose you." I leaned back in my chair. "And if I had died before rewriting that will, would you still be sitting here?" He didn't answer. That was answer enough. "I'm not going to pretend this never happened," I said. "You took something sacred and turned it into a transaction. You broke trust that may never fully return." He nodded slowly. "I understand. I won't take you out of my life," I added. "But you won't be getting back into the parts that matter until you've earned it." "Fair," he whispered. We sat in silence for a long time. Just the ticking of the kitchen clock and the hum of the old fridge. "I told Emma everything," he said. "About the emails, the pressure, all of it. She deserves to know who she's related to. She said something to me after the dinner," he continued. "She said, if Grandpa can live with so much grace, you can learn to live with your guilt." I let out a soft breath. "That girl's got more of your mother in her than either of us." James stood, unsure. "I'll go. But thank you, for at least letting me try." As he reached the door, I said one more thing. "If you want a relationship with me, James, it starts with showing up. Not for the will. Not for the house. Just for me." He nodded, voice cracking. "I will." And then he left. The wind outside picked up as the door clicked shut behind him. I stood there a long while, staring at that closed door, listening to the sound of his footsteps retreating down the porch stairs. I didn't cry. I didn't feel victorious. But I did feel grounded. Like the house knew something had been made right, not repaired, not fixed, but faced. Later that night, Emma called to check in. She didn't ask about James. She just said, "I'm coming by Saturday. You promised to show me how to use that wood lathe." I smiled for the first time in days. "I'll have it ready. Because not all family is lost. Some of it is just beginning." Brain, do you think the father made the right choice? Comment and don't forget to like and subscribe for more true life stories. The house was quieter than it had ever been. Not the lonely kind of quiet. I'd lived through that before, after Marjorie passed. That silence had weight to it, a kind of grieving gravity that sat on your chest and didn't let up. No, this silence was different. It felt clean. Like a room finally aired out after years of stale breath and closed curtains. The kind of stillness that doesn't ache, it settles. James didn't call again that week. I didn't expect him to. Not after what was said. What was left between us needed space to grow, or wither. Either way, it couldn't be forced anymore. But the town, well, the town had heard. It's funny how quickly stories travel in small places. People pretended they didn't know anything when they saw me, nodding politely at the hardware store, offering extra sugar at the diner, but their eyes gave them away. Irene was the only one brave enough to say it out loud. "Heard you made a statement," she said with a sly smile as she handed me a fresh rhubarb pie. "Just told the truth," I said. She gave a soft chuckle. Truth has a way of echoing. I nodded, accepting the pie like it was armor. The next few days were slow, simple, and strangely peaceful. I read the paper on the porch with a blanket over my knees. I walked to the mailbox each morning. I cooked my meals one at a time instead of heating leftovers. Not because I had to, but because I could. And I spoke to Marjorie. Every morning, same ritual, 1 cup of black coffee, 1 visit to her garden, 1 quiet conversation under the dogwood tree where her ashes lay. I did it, I told her. I protected what we built. I did what you would have done, even if it broke my heart. The wind would always seem to pick up just then, rustling the leaves gently like a response. Sometimes I wondered what she'd say if she could speak back. Would she forgive James? Would she scold me for being too harsh? Or would she simply sit beside me and hold my hand the way she used to, saying nothing, just being there? The answer changed depending on the day. But one morning, about a week after the confrontation, I heard a knock at the back door. It was Emma. She wasn't alone. In her arms was a stack of books, woodworking guides, old volumes from the town library, and one particularly ragged one I recognized immediately, handmade gifts for family holidays. I'd used it to make her mother a carved jewelry box when she was little. She set the books down on the table, brushed her hair behind her ear, and said, "You promised to teach me." And just like that, the air in the house changed again. She came every Saturday after that. Sometimes for an hour, sometimes for the whole afternoon. We didn't talk much at first, just worked with our hands. I showed her how to sand with the grain, how to measure twice and cut once. She listened. Really listened. No phone in her hand. No interruptions. She reminded me of James at that age. Curious. Determined. But where he had always looked forward, hungry for more, Emma seemed to appreciate now. After the 3rd visit, she brought 2 friends from school. Veterans, both, one studying auto repair, the other trying to get his contractor license. They didn't say much, but their eyes lit up when they saw the tools. "Mind if we help clean up the garage?" one of them asked. Before I knew it, we had ourselves a rhythm. A routine. Mondays and Wednesdays, the garage became a quiet little sanctuary for learning, for carving, fixing, remembering. I bought a new coffee pot. Emma brought muffins. The veterans brought stories. And I brought, well, something I didn't know I still had. Purpose. The home stopped feeling like a battleground. It started feeling like ours again. One afternoon, I caught myself laughing at something, a real laugh, belly deep, and it startled me. I realized I hadn't laughed like that in months. Maybe longer. That night, I sat by Marjorie's garden and whispered, "They may have tried to erase us, but we're still here." I wasn't sure if James would ever be part of this new life. He hadn't called. Hadn't visited. Not since that night. And honestly, I didn't know what I'd say if he did. But the pain of that question didn't hurt as much anymore. Because for the first time in a long time, the silence wasn't about loss. It was about growth. Healing doesn't always announce itself with a trumpet. Sometimes, it arrives with sawdust on your shoes and a teenager asking you, "Is this straight?" And you realize, in that moment, that you still matter. Not as a will to be read or a burden to be moved. But as someone with something to give. The idea came slowly, like most things at my age. Not in a flash, not with fanfare. Just a quiet nudge in the back of my mind, something gentle but persistent. It was a Tuesday morning when it finally took root. Emma and I were reorganizing the garage after the latest woodworking session. One of the younger vets, Miguel, I think, had just finished sanding down an old shelf. He looked around at the space and said, "You could build something real here, Mr. Carson. This isn't just a workshop, it's a place to start over." I looked around after he said that. Dust hung in the shafts of light coming through the windows. Tools lined the pegboard wall. The old radio Marjorie loved still sat on the corner, humming faint jazz from a local station. A place to start over. The words echoed in me. That evening, I sat at the kitchen table with a legal pad, the kind with the thick yellow pages and the green lines. I started writing. Guest bedrooms. A proper dining area. Storage lockers for veterans in transition. Classes in woodwork, home repair, even budgeting. A community space, inside the home Marjorie and I built, rooted in the values we held dear, respect, dignity, resilience. The next day, I called Alicia at the Veterans Center. "I've got a plan," I told her. She listened patiently as I laid it out. When I finished, there was a long pause. "You don't want to just donate your house," she said. "You want to build something inside it." "Yes." She was quiet a moment longer. "That's more than generous, Mr. Carson. That's transformative." "Don't call me Mr. Carson," I said. "Just call me John." She laughed gently. "All right, John. When can we start?" Within a week, she had people walking through the property, quietly, respectfully, clipboard in hand. They weren't suits or corporate types. They were builders. Planners. People who saw possibility, not profit. They asked good questions. Could we convert the den into a common area? Yes. Would you be willing to have rotating volunteers stay in one of the guest rooms? Of course. Every time someone asked me if something was okay, I found myself saying yes. Not out of surrender. Out of hope. The house began to change again, not by force, not like before. This time, it was being loved into its new life. Emma visited more often. She painted signs for the future rooms, Marjorie's garden, the tool room, quiet space. She even made a sign that said, "You belong here," in big, bold letters. She hung it above the garage entrance. I cried when I saw it. One afternoon, we sat on the porch together, just the two of us, watching as Miguel and another young vet trimmed back the overgrown hedges. "Did you ever think your house would become something like this?" she asked. "No," I said. "But your grandma might have." Emma smiled. "She would have loved this. I nodded. She would have told me to stop overthinking it and just say yes. Emma laughed. Sounds like her. Later that evening, I found an old photo album tucked in the hall closet. Inside were pictures of James as a boy, fishing, riding his bike, sitting on Marjorie's lap with jam on his cheeks. I didn't cry. I didn't get angry. I just flipped through the pages, page after page of memories that had been real once. And I thought, this is what life is. Layers. Some sweet. Some painful. But none of it erased. I took one photo out, a picture of Marjorie holding James at the edge of our garden, her arms wrapped around him like the world couldn't touch him there. I placed it in a new frame and set it in the entryway. Let guests see what this house was, so they'd understand what it had become. The town began to take notice. People stopped me at the post office, asking if they could volunteer. Irene offered to bring weekly meals. A retired teacher dropped off boxes of books for a lending library. Even the mayor's assistant sent a handwritten note, "Your vision is the kind of quiet leadership this town needs." But it wasn't about leadership. It was about legacy. One night, I walked through the house in the dark, barefoot, quiet. I stopped in each room, the kitchen, the hallway, the den, and placed my hand on the walls like I was checking for a pulse. And I swear I could feel it, the life coming back. Not the old life. A new one. A better one. One that didn't depend on bloodlines or last names. One that welcomed those who needed a second chance. That night, I wrote Marjorie a letter. Not out loud. Not with coffee. Just pen and paper. My darling. I kept my promise. I raised him. I tried. And when I had nothing left to give him, I gave myself to others who needed it. You were right, love isn't something you hold. It's something you pass on. This house is alive again. I think you'd be proud of it. I hope you're proud of me. Always yours. John. When I folded it, I didn't cry. I just smiled. Because I had a new plan. And for once, it didn't revolve around surviving. It was about giving. The house was never quiet anymore, and I loved it. Every room had its own rhythm now. You could hear Miguel's power saw humming softly in the garage, the low murmur of veterans swapping stories over coffee in the kitchen, and the occasional outburst of laughter from the back patio where Emma often worked on her signs or helped paint furniture with some of the newer guests. No one knocked anymore. They just came in, always with a, "Hey, John," or "Good morning, sir," carrying bags of tools, grocery store muffins, or just the kind of company that didn't require small talk. It was a far cry from the cold, stiff visits I used to get from James and Jess. This was different. This was family. There was Jeremy, the Navy vet with a bum leg and a heart of gold, who took it upon himself to rebuild the shed without being asked. Lila, who used to sleep in her car and now taught budgeting classes in the old Dentern learning room. And Tom, quiet and pale, who hadn't spoken a full sentence his first 2 weeks, but who now sat beside me on the porch most evenings, just breathing the same air in peaceful silence. And Emma. Always Emma. She brought light into every corner of the house. When she wasn't studying or helping others learn to sand and stain, she was sitting with me, talking about nothing, or everything. She called it, the project. I called it, home. I remember one afternoon in particular. It was just past 3, the sun pouring golden through the windows. Emma was helping one of the new arrivals, a young woman named Tasha, learn how to use a circular saw. I was watching from the porch when Emma looked up and said, "Grandpa, tell her how you learned to build that bench." So I told the story. About Marjorie, and the warped piece of oak, and how I nearly gave up until she brought me lemonade and said, "Well, it's crooked, but it's still beautiful." Everyone laughed. Even me. It wasn't until later that I realized something had shifted in that moment. No one had looked at me with pity. They'd looked at me with respect. Not because of what I'd lost, but because of what I was still giving. That's what family is, I think. Not the people who expect things from you, but the ones who appreciate you. I saw James once that week, or rather, saw his truck. He didn't stop. Just drove by slowly, windows up, eyes forward. Maybe he couldn't face it. Maybe he was hoping I'd wave. I didn't. Not out of anger. Just finality. There was a time when that would have gutted me. Now, I just felt sad for him. Not the kind of sadness that wants to fix things, the kind that accepts someone may never change. And that's okay. Because while he stayed away, others stepped in. I came into the kitchen one morning to find Lila making eggs and Jeremy fixing the wobbly leg on the table. They were laughing, a real, warm laugh that filled the room the way Marjorie's piano music used to. I stood there for a moment, just watching. Then Jeremy looked up and said, "You built something good here, John." That hit me harder than any apology ever could. Later that week, a reporter from the local paper stopped by. Word had gotten around. She wanted to do a feature on the house, the transformation, the mission, the people. She asked me to pose for a picture in front of the porch. I almost said no. But then Emma walked out, took my hand, and stood beside me. Click. They published it the next day. Front page. Veteran turns family home into Hope House. Subhead, a legacy of loss becomes a legacy of healing. James didn't call. But Emma brought me a copy and left it folded neatly on the kitchen table. And taped to it was a sticky note. "You gave this house a new name. And it suits you better than Carson ever did." That night, I sat on the porch as the sun went down, Tom beside me in his usual chair. He didn't speak, but after a while he nodded slowly and said, "You ever think blood makes people family, but it's the not blood that makes them stay?" I smiled. That's exactly it. And it was. Because these weren't people I'd raised. They weren't tied to me by name or blood or obligation. But they showed up. They cared. They looked me in the eye and said thank you, not because they wanted something, but because they meant it. Marjorie would have called it a miracle. I call it real family. Chosen. Earned. Cherished. I hadn't seen him in nearly 3 months. After the will confrontation, James disappeared, not just from my life, but from the town entirely. No calls, no texts, not even a holiday card. For a while, I wondered if I'd hear from him again at all. And truth be told, I was starting to be okay with that. Until the day I opened the front door and found him standing there. No warning. No call ahead. Just him, holding a small brown paper bag in both hands, looking thinner than I remembered. He wasn't wearing his usual tailored coat. No briefcase. Just jeans, an old hoodie, and eyes that looked like they hadn't rested in days. "Hi, Pop," he said quietly. It stopped me for a moment. He hadn't called me that in years. "Can I come in?" I didn't move. Not at first. But something in his face, not regret, not panic, just weariness, made me step aside. He walked in like a man entering a church, slow and quiet. His eyes flicked around the living room, landing on the veterans' photos, the new furniture, the books stacked on the table. "It's different," he said. "Yes," I replied. "It's better." He didn't argue. We sat in the kitchen, just like we used to. He placed the paper bag on the table and pushed it toward me. "What's this?" He looked away. "Pecan pie. Thought you might want some." I opened it. Store-bought. A little crushed on the side. Still, I nodded. "Thanks." He cleared his throat. "Emma told me about what you're doing here. The classes. The people staying." She's part of it, I said. They all are. He nodded slowly. She's a good kid. She's your kid, I said, a little sharper than I meant. He flinched. I know. Silence stretched between us. The clock ticked on the wall. I've been thinking a lot, he finally said. About what I became. What I allowed Jess to make me. You don't get to blame her for everything. I'm not, he said quickly. I let it happen. I let her do the talking. I let the money speak louder than my own father. I saw you as logistics. Not as the man who raised me. He looked up, and for the first time in years, I saw something real behind his eyes. I'm not here to fix anything, he added. I know I can't. But I didn't want you to think I didn't care. I did. I just didn't know how to show it. Not after I let it all fall apart. I nodded slowly. You were my boy. I'd have done anything for you. And I did. But love isn't about one big mistake. It's about all the small ones after, the chances to make it right that you walked past. His jaw tightened. I didn't walk past this one, he said quietly. That sat in the air between us for a long time. I'm not changing the will, I said. I figured. I'm not doing it to punish you. I'm doing it because it's done. That chapter. That story. He looked at the floor. I deserve that. I'm not trying to teach you a lesson, I added. Life already did. He took a breath, slow and deliberate. I don't expect anything, he said. I just wanted to sit with you one more time. Not as a son asking for something. Just, as a man who finally understands what he lost. He reached into his coat and pulled out a small envelope. It's for Emma. A letter. I don't expect her to read it now. Maybe not for years. But, give it to her when you think she's ready. I took it without opening it. We sat a few minutes more, sipping tea, not speaking. When he stood to leave, he looked around again, eyes lingering on the framed photo of Marjorie by the entryway. She would have done the same thing, he said. Cut me out. Maybe sooner than you did. I nodded. She'd have done it with fire in her eyes and a smile on her face. He gave a small, sad chuckle. Yeah, she would have. At the door, he turned back. Thank you, he said. For letting me come. Thank you, I replied. For knowing it was your turn to leave. He gave a small nod. Then he walked down the porch steps, got into a beat-up old truck, not the SUV Jess always drove, and disappeared down the road without looking back. I stood at the doorway a long time. Not sad. Not angry. Just, certain. The visit hadn't fixed anything. There were no tearful reconciliations, no long embraces, no promises of redemption. Just honesty. And that was enough. That evening, I gave the envelope to Emma. She didn't open it. Just held it gently in her palm and said, if he's learning, that's something. Yes, I said. It's a start. She slid the envelope into her backpack and smiled. I'm not going anywhere. I believed her. Speech balloon. Do you believe some apologies come too late? Let us know in the comments. It was a warm spring morning when we officially opened the doors. Alicia called it a launch, though there were no balloons, no speeches, no cutting ribbons with oversized scissors. Just folding chairs, homemade lemonade, and a circle of people who understood what it meant to be broken, and rebuilt. The plaque arrived that morning. Hand-carved by Emma and Miguel, polished smooth with beeswax and patience. It read, Marjorie's house, a place to start again. I ran my fingers across the letters, tracing the grain like it was her handwriting. The house buzzed with energy that day. Veterans past and present brought their families. Neighbors came by with casseroles and photo albums. Lila gave a short talk in the living room about how this place saved her after a decade of couch surfing and burnout. Jeremy handed out keys to 2 new residents, grinning like a proud uncle. And I just watched it all. Watched the walls come alive with laughter and music and the sound of people moving forward. Watched the kitchen, the same one I built with Marjorie in the 80s, now serving as a shared gathering space where strangers became companions. Watched Emma at the head of the table, guiding a group through a budget planning session with the same calm clarity her grandmother used to have when balancing our checkbook. No one asked where James was. No one needed to. This wasn't his anymore. This was ours. And I realized, as I sat on the front porch watching a new set of boots step across the welcome mat, that I didn't miss what was lost, not in the way I thought I would. Some things aren't meant to be restored. They're meant to be reborn. Marjorie's garden had bloomed again that spring. The dogwood tree stretched higher than ever, pink blossoms fanned out like arms welcoming the sky. The tulips had come back too, bold and yellow, despite years of neglect. The veterans planted new beds, tomatoes, basil, rosemary. They lined the edge of the fence with sunflowers, so the house always smiles, one of them said. Emma found an old photo of Marjorie in the attic, her kneeling in the garden, dirt on her hands, laughing like she didn't know grief existed. We framed it and hung it in the hallway beside the photo of the ribbon-cutting day. 2 sides of the same story. I often sat under that dogwood tree in the evenings, coffee in hand, just like always. Sometimes someone would join me, Tom, with his quiet presence. Lila, with her non-stop chatter. Emma, always with a new idea or question. One evening, she brought out a small wooden box. "I made this for you," she said. I opened it to find a collection of small things, a photo of her as a child with Marjorie, a folded note that simply said thank you, and a carved medallion that read Builder of Homes and Hearts. I didn't say anything for a while. I couldn't. Emma smiled softly. "You didn't just give us a place to live. You gave us a reason to believe in people again." I held that little medallion in my hand for a long time. That night, I wrote in my journal, something I hadn't done in years. "This home has known sorrow, but it has never stayed broken. Its walls have held pain, but they were built with love. And love, when passed on, can outlive even the deepest betrayal." I never heard from Jess again. James sent one letter, a simple note thanking me for letting him speak that day. He didn't ask for anything. He didn't promise anything either. And that felt right. A thread left where it belongs, no longer frayed, just finished. But Emma, she stayed. She became the heart of the house in ways I never could have predicted. Not just a helper, but a builder in her own right. And one day, maybe, when I'm gone, she'll keep this place alive. Not because of a name in a will, but because she believes in it. Because she understands that a home isn't just who you live with, it's what you live for. Marjorie once told me, years ago, as we painted the living room with mismatched rollers and laughed at the mess we were making, "One day, when we're gone, maybe someone else will fill these walls with love." She was right. They did. They still do. And now, as I sit on this porch, watching the lights in each room flicker on like stars in a new sky, I don't feel alone. I feel surrounded. By voices that matter. By stories worth telling. By people who didn't come from me, but came for me. This house didn't die when my family left it. It lived when my real family arrived.